May the words of our mouths and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Today we are going to do something new and different, as you can see by the guests sitting behind me. And in our text today, Jesus also did something new and different. The disciples didn't expect Jesus to enter into a full-fledged conversation with a woman midday, and especially not a Samaritan woman. Not only is it at this time unusual for a rabbi or a Jewish man to converse with a woman in public, it is even more unusual at this time because Jews and Samaritans did not mix culturally. And like a lot of divisions that we have in our world, there aren't a lot of good foundation for this division. So the disciples should have known a little bit better that when they went into the town to get some food, that Jesus would be up to something. This is the longest dialogue, I mentioned this to the children, the longest dialogue that Jesus has with anybody in the Bible. And thinking about the longest dialogue, I might expect that to be with the disciples, or at the Last Supper, or maybe a dialogue he has with God. But it is with this unexpected woman that even the disciples are kind of confused why he's engaging with her. So this connecting across difference, especially when the world says, don't mix, is something that Jesus guides us and encourages us into today. With all the divisions that kept these two from talking to one another, Jesus and the Samaritan woman, they had one similarity. They were both thirsty, parched from the world. Thirsty for something beyond the division of their cultures, thirsty for something that can only come from God. Jesus had been traveling all day, and when the disciples went into town, Jesus walked over to a well to get a drink. Who goes to a well without a cup or a bucket? Jesus did. And the woman is there. It is the 6th hour of the day, the text says, which is high noon, and we know that the other women would have gone to the well early in the morning before it got too bright. Going to the well was a social hour, but this particular Samaritan woman avoids the social hour, leading us to believe that she was stigmatized in some way. And she was thirsty. She was thirsty for water and maybe for something more. And the first thing Jesus says to her is, "Give me a drink." And Jesus wants to share her water bottle, which is another taboo layered onto this. And the woman knows it. She responds, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" And then to emphasize this a little bit more, the text says in parentheses, Jews do not share things in common with the Samaritans. They make this really clear in the text. And she still gives him a cup of water. This is a moment of vulnerability for Jesus, where he needs something from her in order to give the message that he needs to for the world. Jesus, in this moment, is receiving something. And once she gives him a cup of water, he informs her that he has access to living water, a wellspring of life that quenches the thirst of the soul. And she is hooked. We know that we need physical nourishment, but we also need spiritual nourishment. We need rest and prayer, play and time in nature. We need reading of scripture and times of silence. We need music. We need family. We need to listen for the voice of truth in a sea of noise. What is your spiritual nourishment? Prayer can happen at any time during any activity, and we can always take a moment to include God consciously in our activities, like Jesus did in his conversation with this woman. And prayer is a form of this living water. Relationship is also a form of this living water. And Jesus and the woman at the well both become nourished by this living water through their conversation. So in honor of this form of nourishment, in honor of Jesus speaking with someone outside of his culture, instead of just telling you about this sort of thing and the value of it, I wanted to model it with you. Imam Sami and Vjosa spend so much of their time speaking with people of a different culture or a different religion than their own, in order to bring more peace into hearts. And I have been transformed by my friendships with both of them, and I'm so grateful that they are here to be in conversation with me. And so, Sami and Vjosa, I invite you to come forward. And we have one microphone. I'm going to relinquish the pulpit spot. I've never shared the pulpit before. I've relinquished it completely or preached from it. But to share in dialogue from the pulpit is a really new and exciting thing for me to be doing. So I want to, in the spirit of Jesus asking questions, ask you, Sami, how do you access this living water? Or how do you connect to God on a daily basis?
Hello, everybody. I'm honored to be here. And when you were giving your sermon, so many similar stories came to my mind. And I just want to share one in particular before I answer your prayer. There's a famous story of a prostitute walking through the desert. And she is extremely thirsty, as anybody in the desert would be. And she finds a well, and she goes into the well, and she uses her shoe and drinks from the well. And then when she climbs out, there's a dog panting, and he's about to die. And he's showing that death through the licking of a stone, which has no moisture in it. But he's hoping he'll find some moisture in the stone. And the prostitute feels bad for the dog. So she goes into the well and uses her shoe to fill it with water, bring it out of the well, and give the dog enough water so it survives. And it's narrated in our tradition that on the Day of Judgment, God wipes away all of her sins and allows her into paradise for that one deed. And it's a beautiful story that's often narrated in our tradition. As far as prayer goes, we are mandated, or it's obligatory upon us, to pray 5 times a day. And each prayer can be as short as 5 minutes and as long as 20, 30, an hour, depending on how much you want to spend with God. It's really up to you. And it's 5 times because we start our day with prayer and we end our day with prayer, to remind us of the blessings of God throughout our day, and to take any of the difficulties we face at work or in school directly to God, and ask Him directly for the help that we need, and also to thank Him for the blessings we've received. Prayer is a beautiful connection to the Creator. And the daily connection, I would say for myself, reminds me of my place in the world, who I am, my purpose, where I'm going, and where I've come from. And just really quickly, I want to just share with you the story of prayer. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was going through a lot of persecution from the people in Arabia, in about the 10th or 11th year of his prophecy, God asked him to come to paradise. Angel Jibreel took him from his bed to paradise to meet God. And when you meet a king, traditionally, the king gives a gift. And the gift that was given to the Prophet Muhammad was not only for the Prophet, peace be upon him himself, but for all of his followers, and that gift was prayer. And the story goes, and it's a funny story, that when the Prophet's coming down through the layers of heaven, there's 7 layers of heaven, in one of them he meets Moses. And Moses says to Prophet Muhammad, "What did God say to you and give you?" And he said, "He gave me prayer." And he said, "How many prayers did he give you?" He said, "He gave me 50 prayers a day." And Moses says, "My people don't pray once a week. what makes you think they're going to pray 50 times a day? Go back to God and ask him to give you a better deal. So he goes back up and he asks God to lessen the prayer, and God lessens it by 10. So it becomes 40. But he said you'll get the reward of 50, your community. And then again, Moses stops him and says, what happened? And he says, it's 40. He said, they're not going to pray 40 times a day. Go back. So he goes back and forth until God reduces it to 5. And he said, your community will get the reward of 50, but you will pray 5 times a day. And then again, Moses says they're not going to pray 5 times a day. Go back. And Prophet Muhammad responds, I am too embarrassed to go back at this point. So that's the story of prayer. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing for our community.
Thank you so much, Sami. And that's such a delightful story. And it occurs to me that there are ways to pray in all religions, and that this prayer does connect us with the living water, the sort of wellspring of connection to God. And I just wanted to mention how powerful it was to be praying with the children, and that you invited us into that. And I'm reminded of a time in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 26, when Jesus is at the hour of his death. He goes completely to the ground and says, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Then he says, yet not as I will, but as you will. And that going to the ground completely gives that feeling of complete humility and surrender, which I wouldn't have remembered that was in my tradition had I not experienced that with the two of you. So I thank you for that.
Actually, I was kind of getting there. This is also a tradition from all the prophets before Prophet Muhammad, that they used to bow down and with the face in the ground, that there's always narrations like that. So this is not a connection just to God alone, but to this history of these great people who have done this before this day. And also, as we pray, we have a relationship with God, but then we have a relationship that just gets bigger, like with other people who are praying at the same time with you, like what we did together. And then with another city of people, and then around the globe, and also throughout history, people that have prayed before us and that will pray in the future. So I think that's very special too.
We often say at communion that we're joined by the saints of all times and the prophets. So that connects to that lineage that we both share, that comes from Judaism, that goes through Christianity and kind of ends in Islam or continues beyond, who knows.
And being the ultimate humility before God, when we bow down with our face and we say that basically I am the one, the lowest, and you are the highest. When we declare that, that's the ultimate humility as well.
Are there ways besides the 5 times a day praying that you pray or that you connect to God throughout the day?
So I brought 2, what do they call this in school? Well, when they tell you to bring something to school so you can show your classmates. Show and tell, yeah. So I brought you guys some show and tell pieces. So these are prayer beats, and this is called a tasbih. And it has 99 beats to signify the 99 names of God. And Muslims have used it throughout the ages to count how many times they say a particular phrase or a name of God to reflect upon him. So when they would go to a Muslim scholar, the Muslim scholar will say, go home and recite 100 of this name of God. For example, if I had a backache, or I was sick, the scholar might say, go home and say 100 times every day the name Ash-Shafi, which means the healer. God is the healer, right? He is the doctor for humanity. So the hope is by saying the name of God, the healer, God will eventually intervene into whatever sickness is in your body and remove it, right? Every day I say Astaghfirullah, which means God forgive me. And so this is a modern example of the tasbih. This is on Amazon, a counter, a digital counter. And that way I can just do like 1,000, and like I can forget about it and be like, where was I? And then I continue till I hit 1,000, right? So we are, the Prophet Muhammad said, every day I say 70 times, God forgive me. And we're encouraged outside of the 5 obligatory prayers to ask God for whatever we need. So like when I'm driving here today from my home in Hartford, I ask God to make my words beautiful for the people, enjoyable, make them make sense for the people. So this was a conversation I had with God just an hour ago on the way here. When I finish my meal, I say, all praise belongs to God who has fed me, who has quenched my thirst, and has made me conscious of him. Right? This is a daily food prayer that we make after every meal. So we connect with him in so many ways, and this is highly encouraged. As similar to the Christian tradition.
So I guess I was just wanting to add on to the first question when we talked about the 5 obligatory prayers. And so we believe that once that becomes your day routine, everything that you do becomes also worship. Because you start with the name of God. If you start eating with the name of God, that will become a worship, not just a food that you just temporarily enjoy, and it's not just worldly benefit of whatever it is that you do throughout the day, but because you start with the name of God, then it becomes eternal and divine. So that's also another thing. So that, for example, when we work all day and we feel like there's not really a lot of benefit about it, if we have under consideration that in the name of God we did this for the sake of God, then that will become worship, and that will also become light for us in the hereafter as well.
Vjosa, I want to invite you to come to the pulpit because I have a question specifically for you. So come share with us this way. And so sometimes it's occurring to me when we do relate across differences, that there can be misunderstandings and that we can offend one another, and that this is sort of part of being in relationship with one another and part of cross-cultural, cross-religious, cross-racial, whatever divisions there are ways that we can sort of offend one another. And I confess that at one point I thought the hijab was an oppressive thing enforced by men in order to control women's bodies. And so that's kind of my confession. And in talking to Muslim women and actually experiencing being covered myself, which you helped me with this summer during a class we shared together called Building Abrahamic Partnerships. And the professor of that class is actually here, Yeheskel Landau. We're so grateful for helping us create these sorts of connections. Vjosa, you helped me put the hijab on, and you guided me into a mosque, and you allowed me to pray next to you. And so I learned the sort of humility of entering into your form of worship, and in particular what it means to be a Muslim woman, to choose to cover. So I want to ask you to speak about that, if you could. How the hijab helps you connect to God.
Yeah, so hijab is a very big part of my spiritual journey. You mentioned earlier that everybody's welcome here, no matter where their journey takes them, and this is where I'm at. This is my journey. It's hijab, or the headscarf, or the whole outfit that is more modest. It's an outer manifestation of an inner commitment to worshiping God and to worshiping God alone and being in obedience to God alone. And trust me, I would have done it if it was man. It's basically something that I commit to please, so that I only please God alone. And at my home, as I put it on in front of the mirror, I think about it as to how is this connecting me to God and my relationship with God, and I see it. I see because as I'm doing it, I silence my ego and my temptation to please anything other than God. And so in that way, it becomes very special for me. And hijab is basically to not attract unwanted attention, which is kind of ironic in US because it's a target now. But that's really the idea of the hijab, and I wear it very proudly to show devotion for God and my religion. when you see a woman like me, you know that she's a Muslim woman. It's very obvious. So it's an identity. But in the same time, it's a statement and an attitude as to, you will only see what I want you to see. And see me, and you understand what hijab is really. It also reminds you of God. Because you know that I'm wearing this for God. So therefore, it's not just connecting me to God, but also people around me who really understand why I do it.
Thank you so much for speaking about that. And I wanted to mention that the text that we have today ends with the Samaritan woman converting and sort of proclaiming that she understands. And although at this time in Scripture, Christianity doesn't exist yet, there are Jesus followers and a Jesus movement, but the sort of, I wanted to lift up that there's a problem sort of with cross-cultural dialogue in this text, that the reason maybe that Jesus engaged this woman, that it's in Scripture, is that she comes to follow him. And I wanted to mention that because I think it's important that we not try to convert one another to one another's religions, that we don't dialogue to convert one another, but to become more rooted in our own faiths. And I think that's such an important distinction to lift up, that when we understand other people's faiths, it doesn't wash over ours or water down our own, but helps strengthen our own. And I will remember what you said about when I see other Muslim women, I will see God. I will see the reason for the hijab is God. And that's so helpful.
And also, I also follow the message of Jesus if we get to the Samaritan woman, because part of my dressing like this is so that I can emulate Jesus' mother, Mother Mary, who also looks very modest when we see her pictures in different churches. She's always looking very modest, and not just in the looks, but also in her piety and worship. So in a way, it's very connected.
Well, there is so much that we can learn from one another, and I have become so enriched by my friendships with you, and I want to invite you all to come to second hour so that we can continue this dialogue and continue learning from one another and learning more about prayer in Islam and spiritual practice in Islam. And I want to give a blessing to the two of you and to everybody gathered here, that may God bless each of us in our prayers and through our relationships. And may we each follow in the paths that allow us to become aware of our own thirst. And may we travel to those parched places in the world to offer that living water. Let it be so. Amen.